Welcome to Warrior Stories. My name is Susanna Clark Taylor. Today is January 27th, 2023, and my guest today is Tonya Milling, Executive Director of the Arc of Virginia. Hi, Tonya.
Hi, how
How
are
are you?
you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for
Good.
asking me here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for coming on Warrior Stories. So I always like to share how I know my guests. And Tonya, you and I had the opportunity to work on a piece of legislation last year. I was a participant in the Partners in Policymaking Advocacy training program put on by the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities. And as part of that training program, all of the advocates were asked to select a topic to train around. And I'll never forget the conversation that Dr. Penny Sweetenberg-Lee had with the participants when we were discussing the advocacy topics. She said to us, whatever keeps you up at night should be what you decide to train around.
Oh, that's good.
And that was really impactful. I kind of already knew what I wanted to advocate for, but that drove it home because the topic that I chose was parents as paid providers for their own children with disabilities. And this issue was not new. This is something that parents had been advocating for many, many years. But because of COVID-19 and the federal health emergency and the temporary measures under Appendix K that were put into place, parents in many states, from what I understand, but parents in the Commonwealth of Virginia were temporarily allowed to be paid caregivers for their own children with disabilities, which was great because a lot of us were no longer able to have people come into our homes. But the issue was that for many of us, COVID wasn't the reason why we needed to be able to be our own child's paid caregivers. We had been struggling for years, many of us, that even if we had a reliable caregiver come in and help us with our children in our own homes, it didn't mean we had the time, the emotional bandwidth, and just the freedom and the liberty to go out and work full time, even if we had somebody helping us. And that was my situation. It was very difficult for me to be employed and to be available 24/7, to be on call for my daughter. And when I was finally allowed to be my own child's paid caregiver, it made an enormous difference for my family financially. And as they kept talking about the federal health emergency ending and this particular measure underneath Appendix K ending, my anxiety kept building and I kept thinking, I need this to last. And I didn't, I know other parents of children with disabilities here in the Commonwealth, but I didn't hear a lot of people talking about it. I just knew it mattered to me. And I thought, you know what, I will pick this topic as a training topic. I didn't anticipate that it would go anywhere, but I just thought this is important to me, so I'm going to select this topic. But several other parents who were advocates in training selected the same topic, and then we had the opportunity to participate in what was called Capitol Day, where we invited our elected officials to come, and it was supposed to be like a mock legislative panel where we testified in front of various elected officials. But we managed to get the ear of some people that could help us that day. After one of my fellow advocates, Kate Opa, testified, her delegate Robert Bell, kind of stopped the proceedings. He was quite passionate and quite personal in his response, and he shared some of his experience as having an adult son of his own with autism, and that he knew very well what it was like for families in this space. And he told us that he would do whatever he could do. There was no guarantee, but he would do whatever he could do to help us. And then you also were in attendance as the executive director of the Arc of Virginia. And I'm going to give you some time in a minute to explain all of that to anybody who might not know what the Arc of Virginia does. But you got involved afterwards and you reached out to us and said, let me help you. And you and everybody at the Arc of Virginia added parents as paid providers to the ARC's legislative agenda for 2022. And basically you held our hands through that process. You told us where we should be testifying, where to sign up. You helped us with our speeches. You told us who to email and when. I won't ever forget the day I received your email. It was toward the end of February. And basically, you just said both the House and the Senate have accepted parents as paid providers, this particular budget amendment, into their proposed budgets. And of course, there was that sliver of chance it wouldn't go through because things are always, not entirely certain. But basically, you said, congratulations. You guys did it. And I will tell you, I sat there and I started to cry. It was such a meaningful experience to me because as a parent of a child with disabilities, so often you feel so helpless. You just feel so helpless. And so often you feel alone and you're not sure that anything that you could ever do or say could make a difference, not only to your own child, which is where we're battling so often, getting our children the services they need, but getting ourselves the support we need. It is exhausting. And to know that I had had the opportunity to not only make a change that was so significant for myself, but to make a change for so many other parents in Virginia. It was a very meaningful experience, and I will forever be grateful for it. So thank you for your help in that process, because we literally could not have done that without you.
It's the best thing. Parents coming together and that, like you said, you feel like you're alone, but to learn that you're not and
Yep.
that there's all these other, it's unbelievably powerful. So
It really is. Why don't we move on from there and have you tell us about the Arc of Virginia? Most people who, watch warrior stories have a general understanding, but there may be those that don't know what the Arc is and what you do. So if you wouldn't mind, tell us about the Arc of Virginia, what your mission is, an overview of kind of what you do as the executive director of that organization, and then maybe a little bit about your personal and professional background that brought you to the place you're at today.
Well, I love talking about the ARC. I get paid to do that. So thank you for asking. So we're the state chapter of the world's largest community-based organization advocating for people with developmental disabilities. And that's a really exciting thing. We've been in Virginia for almost 70 years. Wow. Doing this work, right?
I didn't realize it was that old. The organization was that old. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so it's the Arc of United States at the top and then state chapters. And then we do our work with those families and all of the people that you mentioned through chapters, local chapters. So we have 23 local chapters, and then plenty of people that are also just members of the Arc of Virginia. And that's how it's done, right? In communities all over. We are a membership organization. When you join the Arc, you are joining saying that I believe in this mission and I'm going to help move that forward. Our mission is protecting the rights of people with developmental disabilities, but also supporting and advocating for their full inclusion in their communities, whatever that looks like for them, how they want to live their life. Every person's circumstance is different. That's what our work is. I'm very proud and pleased that because we are made up of people with disabilities and families of people, our board of directors is, of course, where we take our directives. And 70% of our board is, by our bylaws, made up of people with disabilities and families. And so I think that's really important. A lot of our staff, that's true too, but making sure that that leadership is people with the lived experience is key, I think, to being able to make appropriate and effective change, right? Our work falls in two areas, mostly two areas. One side of the agency I always think of as supporting families, supporting people. So that's information and resources. We're probably one of the primary INR information and referral sources in the state. We work with probably between 800 and 1,000 families a year, help walking them through the system. This life doesn't come with a little handbook that tells people exactly what to do. And so that's what we're here. Lucy on our team, we have several people on our team who work in that arena to support families from the very beginning with diagnosis. It might be at the NICUs. We do a lot of work in our early intervention with kids, families right when their journey first starts, really. In fact, the name of that program is New Path because that is the path in your life at that point. Your journey is beginning, and it'll take a lot of turns, and we want to be there all the way. So information, resources, individual advocacy cases, someone comes to us and they have had their rights stepped on, or they're struggling with their IEP, whatever it might be. That certainly comes up a lot. So if the support for families can be just a little pointing them in the direction, a few phone conversations, all the way to hours and hours and months of consultation and walking them through issues. So that is really where everything falls on one half, getting information, providing the convention education, all of those resources. And then the other side of the agency is the public policy work. And like I said, we've been doing that forever. So we have been part of, when you look back over the history, really the big advances that have happened here in Virginia, that have taken place. The art has been the center of that, or been at the center of that, whether that's housing lawsuits, discrimination suits, getting the DD waiver system and Medicaid waivers brought to Virginia, several pardon cases, individual cases, because a lot of times people, adults with disabilities, will end up in the justice system unfairly.
Right.
So we've been involved with a lot of pardon cases.
Yep.
And then, of course, very involved with DOJ being in Virginia to
Right.
make sure that people have access to their community, and that that's what we're building. So it's been really looking back over, that's a history project we're actually doing right now.
Cool.
I found somebody. Yeah, I was really excited to, because we had our history up through 2005. I could find that in the drive and all of that. But lots happened since then, right? And so I found this great niche disability writer through LinkedIn. And so as a project, she's updating and bringing us up to speed. And that is really fun to see, watch that progression. There's so far to go, right? But you got to give that nod to where you've been.
Absolutely, because when you look back at the history of disability in America, it is devastating. Just the abuses and the injustices. And, every time I say go to an IP meeting for my daughter, or anytime I connect her with some kind of service, I am very aware that even 30, 40 years ago, some of these things that my daughter has direct access to, parents of children with disabilities back then could not find those services. Mm-hmm. And of course, you go back far enough, and all children with disabilities were placed in institutions, and their families oftentimes never saw them again. I mean, it is deep, it is vast, and it is heartbreaking. Like, researching the history of disability in America is not for the faint of heart, because it is devastating. So
it's not. It's interesting you say that, because I remember being maybe a year or two ago at a presentation when everything started being online, and part of that presentation, and there were families and people with disabilities there, and it was about the history, and they almost gave this nice disclaimer, which was to prepare people that what you were going to look at is hard stuff.
Yep.
And every civil rights movement, the history is hard, and the growth happens, and then things go back for a bit, and the growth in every one of these movements. So it takes people fighting forever and endlessly. So gosh, that makes it really important for people to know they're not alone, because that can't be an easy fight.
It is, yeah, it isn't. And that's something I felt at the end of last year, because, up to a certain point in my daughter's life, I didn't feel empowered to help other people. Just her care, it felt really overwhelming. But after that experience and the training that I received through Partners in Policymaking, I thought, most people, when they get involved in public policy change, aren't successful the first year. That I just landed in a place where the situation was right for that legislation to pass. And I thought, it may be that for the rest of my life, if I engage in this, I'm never so fortunate to be directly involved in something like that again, but that's okay. Right. I just promised myself in that moment that I would spend the rest of my life advocating in some way for people with disabilities, or any marginalized community that might need my voice, for the rest of my life, because I had benefited so profoundly, and my daughter had benefited so profoundly from the hard, exhausting work that other people had been doing for decades and decades, that I knew that I had to pay it forward, even if I was one of those people that never saw the end result of the things that I was involved in. So yes, it's devastating, but it's also so hopeful and encouraging. And, it's a work worth doing. And anybody who thinks that their voice doesn't matter, you're wrong. It does. Every little thing helps.
Yeah, I see why we call it, just kind of listening to thinking about that way. I see why we call these movements now, right? What a great, and that's what I always call it, is the movement. But to really think about that ebb and flow and growth throughout time. And so we're really fortunate here to get to. I have a great team of people that I get to work with, which is incredible. And we've been growing over the past few years. I've been here for 5 years. I just had my anniversary.
Right. So tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you ended up, in the position that you're at now.
I've been with the ARC forever, probably 20 years or so, but with different chapters.
Sure.
I was primarily at two different local chapters as executive director, and those local chapters ran services. So I've done housing and employment and all of childcare, all of those services that is sometimes done at local chapters. And in those roles, I got the opportunity to take part in advocacy, but it was the side of the advocacy of mobilizing, right?
Sure.
That's what we want our local chapters to do, to mobilize people, families and individuals to come and do that work. Here, this is the first time at the state chapter I've been able to do the public policy work of researching the problems. We listen to families all year long in a variety of ways to see what's happening on the ground. What are the things we can impact? What's going to have the biggest impact?
Right.
To then drafting legislation, negotiating it, finding patrons, doing the whole 9 yards. And this is the first role I've been able to do that. So I'm 5 years in, still learning, because public policy is a bear.
Yeah.
It's a thing, right? It's definitely a thing. And so every day, I was at the General Assembly yesterday and said to someone, now I'm still learning, but and that, I think I'll be saying that forever.
That's
Yeah,
how we get it right, is being open to learning, right? Because as soon as we think we know it all is the moment we become irrelevant.
that's right. That's right. And so, yeah, so that's where I came up through the ARC. I started working with people with disabilities. And when I was in college, actually, I always say, although it's not the best story or it doesn't make me sound great, I was a real procrastinator, and I was a psych major, and I had waited till like the last semester to go and get my internship and sign up for, and it was working in a group home with adult men who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it just impacted me so much, and it became my career.
I love it. I
Yeah,
love it how sometimes we stumble into things like that.
that's right. We do. And over the years, I think it's actually just not that long ago that I had like a light bulb moment of why I'm so passionate, because a lot of people, I will say, in the field they have the lived experience. They are a parent of someone with a disability. That's very common, particularly in the ARC. And I don't. So it's kind of a little different that I'm not a parent of someone with a disability, but the drive and the passion for inclusion and all of those things, it kind of clicked for me. Not only watching these multitude of people I've been blessed to be able to work with through the years, but I remembered that in elementary school, I was in a special reading class. And it was just through a conversation with a friend that this came out just not that long ago. And I remember on like the mom night, teacher parent night, whatever it is, having to that's what was called special reading class, because I was a slow reader, was in a trailer in the back of the school. And I had to, my mommy was there, and I remember walking down this long sidewalk holding her hand, and I felt embarrassed because I was having to go to this other place, had to leave all the kids there to go show mom this. And that was an awful feeling. And
Right.
that is terrible that here I am, 50 years old, and I remember that feeling.
Right. And if you felt that way in that sliver of your experiences,
Right. Even imagine what everyone else feels that's separated and segregated and pushed aside and treated differently. Yeah. So I think where that just drive comes from, that's a piece of it, this really ingrained thing from childhood.
right,
Um,
that experience that built that level of empathy in you.
yeah, because no one wants to be othered,
No.
because there's no reason to be, right? We know all of our kids and all of us learn best together and benefit from each other's gifts and talents and support each other's deficits. And I mean, it's humanity. Yeah. So that's how I got here.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm hoping that you will Because sometimes we think we might know the meaning of a word or the varieties of a meaning of a word, but sometimes we don't know as much as we think we do. So I'm hoping you will define advocacy. We're going elementary here, okay? Define advocacy and share with us various ways people can engage in advocacy work. In particular, what are some of the less obvious ways, but perhaps most effective ways that people can advocate? And in conjunction, this is kind of a two-part question. In conjunction with that, I'm hoping you will explain why advocating for legislative change should actually, unlike what a lot of people assume, be a last resort.
Yeah, the advocacy to me, it's just speaking up. It's speaking up, and there's a variety of ways to do that. To speak up for what your needs are or your child's needs, whatever that might be, to push for the need to be met. And because people are marginalized and people are treated differently. And so it starts so early. It starts with a mom and a dad who are on that journey, on that path, and they have to share and stand firm in what their child needs. And that's with their teachers, that's with their doctors, that's with their therapists. I was actually, we had a DD Advocacy Day yesterday, so I had the pleasure of being with a mom that I hadn't met before and hadn't spent the day, and her child's 2.5. And we were talking about some of his medical issues and the repeated, almost nagging conversations that she's having with his physician. About something that he's going through from a medical standpoint. That's advocacy. And we're doing it from day one.
When I joined PIP last year, Partners in Policy Making, I thought I was learning how to advocate. I was. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was learning how to advocate. What I had never given myself credit for was the fact that I had been advocating my daughter's entire life. I just didn't look at it as advocacy, but everything I was doing counts as advocacy and was making a huge difference in her life, but has since allowed me to help other people because of what I have learned from that experience.
Because it's educating the people around you about what those needs are. And it builds, as they're more educated, the physicians, the teachers, the team members on an IEP, the lady in the grocery store maybe who doesn't respond well when someone's dysregulated. Educating builds that empathy among community. And I think as that community sense and empathy among people grows, well, that's how some of the formal public policy advocacy gets to succeed, right? Sometimes we do need to change laws and things like that, but it starts with our own community and building that, and not just like you advocating in your life, but you mentioned earlier, helping then other moms and dads who are starting on that path. I talked to a mom who has an Instagram. Her child has a rare syndrome and gets contacts from moms and people from all over the country because they're looking for answers too, particularly some of these rare syndromes where there's not a big organization like the Down Syndrome Association that you sign up to be part of, which is a wonderful organization. It's not there for all of these things. That's when it becomes so grassroots that people are just connecting on their own experiences.
And that's what I tell people that come on Warrior Stories, because sometimes I'll invite people to come on and they'll say, well, I don't have a particular piece of legislation that I'm trying to promote. And I tell them there's so many different areas of advocacy. The other two big pillars that I can see besides the legislative, the policy change is grassroots education. That is so important, just to share experiences so people understand, or share resources or whatever, so people understand, but also just the empathy building, sharing just the difficulty of the situations that we're in, that helps other people be aware of what it is that, members of our family who have disabilities, or, adults with disabilities, just sharing what it is like, builds empathy, which garners that public change in the way that people think and view other people who are different. So that work is just as important as legislative change. But that being said, tell us why you think legislative change should actually be the last resort.
Yeah, because there's that part of the movement that's the public policy, right? That kind of advocacy. And you start by trying, it's systems change, but there are other ways to affect the system. And so we always think of, and actually when I started this job, it was a colleague who's a public policy lobbyist as well in another disability organization. And she was the one who told me, because I thought, oh, I've been hired here. I'm going to get to do legislation. That's the thing. I'm excited. And she's like, no, slow your roll. That's the last thing you want to try. You do want to do it, but there's also working with the departments, working with your local CSPs, your local school board, your local whatever it might be, and then the state department, because it can happen in policy change. They can change their process or policy of how something's done, and that is so much easier, because sometimes they just don't know what's happening, right? But you get to go to your local school board and explain what an impact of a certain policy is having on people, and they might have the authority and the power to make that change. Same thing with DVHDS and DMAS and all of these organizations. There are things that are within their control. And so we want to start there, because that makes us better partners with them, but also because it's just the path of least resistance. And so we might be able to affect change a lot faster. And when you do go into legislation, it's a long process. And when you open those books, the law books, things can happen in committee. You walk into a committee, you've drafted a bill to say one specific thing, and they catch on to another thing that's said in there. And in a minute, this person makes a motion, it can go different directions that you didn't intend. And I think that's why you have to think of that as just being the last resort, because if it's not necessary to change the law, we don't just change the law for the sake of changing the law. We change it in targeted, strategic ways when it needs to be done.
Because the worst thing that can happen is those law books get opened up. Maybe the thing that you're advocating for gets changed, but perhaps something good that's already in place suddenly goes away.
Right.
And that was not the intended effect of the advocacy, but you can't necessarily control what happens in committee when those books are open. So you have to be very precise, right? Like a surgeon with a scalpel, very precise and very purposeful in your language as you're trying to make that change.
And lean on the subject matter experts, the people that are public policy professionals. Pretty much in Virginia, the ARC takes that lead and has had that lead forever, but that only gets done because of the relationships with everybody else, the Arts Society, the PIP graduates, down to all of the other groups that move the work forward and do the mobilizing advocacy is the only way that happens.
That's right. It's a real partnership. And that's what I realized, is that it didn't matter that there was this vast body of knowledge that I did not have going into advocacy, because that's where the art came in, and other people that were experts at policy change, which I am not. But I had the lived experience, I had the passion, and I was willing to donate the time and energy and to develop the courage to just speak up and say, I need this. Other parents in Virginia need this. Please help us. And then when you got involved and the other parent advocates that were involved, that's why that particular piece of legislation was able to pass, because of that partnership.
I kind of think of it as the how, the professional kind of, and the why. The why is the stories and the lived experience. And then, like you said, the volunteering of your time, because it's no easy thing. It's not convenient either, right?
No.
Hey, Susanna, there's a committee meeting. We need you to testify at tomorrow. And it's not even 24 hours from now. And it's going to take place somewhere between the hours of blank and blank. And you just have to be available.
That's right.
It's not convenient. So it is such a commitment. That's why I just love our families and everybody, because I'm just so awed by their commitment and willingness to do that, because they're already living their own lives, supporting that family member or their own selves. And then they may work and they have households and they have all these other things, and to have to add this to it. So we try to get it as targeted as we can so that people can do the lift, because it is a lift.
Okay, so for those who may not understand, Tonya, will you explain how the legislative process works?
And the one thing I love is the very beginning of it, right? That I think people don't know, that everyday people, me, you, citizens, can have an idea and present to their legislator, and like you did, and they may run with it, right? If they hear enough or they're moved enough then they may run with it and put legislation in.
That's exactly what happened with me with Partners in Policymaking last year, because we were told the first thing when you pick your advocacy topic is contact your local legislators. And for me, it was Delegate Wendy Gooditis and Senator Jill Vogel. And I didn't think that they would care about what I had to say, but I was dutiful and I did, I followed what I was being told to do as part of the program. And I wrote them emails and sent them. And both of them, in fact, latched on and ended up being part of that bipartisan coalition that sponsored that budget amendment in the General Assembly. They both on each side, so on the Senate side and then on the House side, they both helped sponsor that bill. So just an email
Right.
make a massive difference in getting legislation passed.
And what a cool feeling to know that you have power, just as a citizen, as a person, as a human in this world, that you can have power. These folks do care, right? Like I will say, and we can all be kind of skeptical and jaded, I think, about politics sometimes, rightly so at times. But by and large, from what I've seen, the members here on the state level really do care. And they're listening. They're in this to make good things happen. And it's a hard job. I'm not here just kind of carrying their water, but it is a hard job from 6 a.m. to super late at night, 7 days a week during session. So they really do put it in, some more than others, obviously. But so that's how it starts, an idea. And sometimes that comes directly from a constituent, or it comes from an organization like a public policy group like us, or Virginia Access, or the many, several other associations that work to do this because we've listened all year. And so we bring in proposals, and that's how like the legislative agenda is made, et cetera. Once it's there, you get it drafted, the idea, you've got a problem and a solution. Yeah, you have to have both of those things. That's really key. It's always amazing to think like this is a short session that we're in this year. So that means it's 45 days. They managed to do the business of almost 2,000 bills. I think it was 1988 or something like that. I counted them pretty much. It's an estimate of the number of bills that went in this year. Actual legislation, not counting the fluffy stuff like resolutions for fun things, right?
Sure.
It's the real business. That takes place in just 6 weeks or so, which is incredible. Right. And so that happens, and that's why their days are so long, and all the advocates' days are so long, because it goes to subcommittee. Those folks are considered to have like a little expertise in maybe general laws or courts of justice or whatever the topic might be. It has to go through that subcommittee. It can die right there, or it can pass and go to a full committee on that same subject, because each big committee is broken into sub. Then it has to pass the full committee. And then if it makes it there, then it goes to the body. The body would be either the House or Senate, wherever it was introduced. Right. And then it gets voted on and discussed and debated on the House or Senate floor. And then what's called crossover is when what made it through this chamber will now go to the other one and start at the beginning, to a subcommittee, to a full committee, and back to the floor. Because any legislation has to be passed by both bodies. Right. And in between that is where a lot of the negotiation happens. Right. That, okay, it's going to fail here. So how do we talk to this person? What edits could be made? Things like that, to get it forward. And then eventually, of course, it comes out the other side and goes to the governor. And that's the bill side of things, which is the laws that we would change. But then there's also the budget. And a huge part of the ARC's agenda is always budget proposals, because that's how you get waiver slots or rates for personal care services or any of the services. And that has a little bit of a less, it seems a little less transparent. I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just the process. Right. Meaning there are a lot of meetings that the budget committee members have that are not public meetings. Sure. They like it or not, that's the way it's done. And so you put in those budget amendments, and they have a different way of being heard in committee. Sure. And they're not going to go in the same committees that the bills would. So, but you're still getting advocates down there, because that's where everybody comes in. That's so key, is when bill or budget amendment is going before someone in that body, we need those votes. Mm-hmm. And they need to know, because they didn't introduce it. They don't know as much about it. They're hearing and learning about 2,000 bills, potentially. So they need these little snippets, and that's where they depend on people coming in to push them, but then also depend on, like when it gets to the more generic area, at the end, like to the house floor or something like that, they're looking to their partners like the ARC, and they're calling and asking, what's your position on this?
Right.
And they're checking it off, right? They want to know because they've built those relationships. Then it gets through, and we all celebrate what manages to make it through.
Right. Sometimes
Yes,
it's unpredictable. Yeah.
oh, very unpredictable.
Right.
You can be really surprised about a lot of things. And that's the other piece about that partnership we mentioned a minute ago. I tell some of the small, like family groups and things like that, and I think I said this when I presented to Pip about how this happens, is politics but is prickly. So you don't want to do that part of it. You don't want to be caught in that, because it's not pretty. And there are times that a good bill that you think someone would pass has an entirely different reason that it's not. And so we're kind of behind the scenes talking to people, getting intel for people who will tell us things,
Right.
to figure that out, because that's not the fun part. That's what everybody always says, what you hear on people say, how the sausage is made. That's the rough stuff, and nobody wants to be part of that. So I've had my eyes opened quite a bit to what can influence something that you just didn't realize. So
Right. And it's not always straightforward, and it relies a lot on relationships. And something that surprised me last year as we went through this process is that I ended up educating my elected officials about things that I just assumed, with my, lack of experience, I just assumed they would know things.
right.
And then I would mention something and they would say, oh, wait, what? Tell me about that. Oh, I'll contact this person and find out more. But prior to the conversation I had, and it was just something casual that I was mentioning, they found out about something that they could then research and move forward with. And so it's all about relationships. It's all about sharing information. And sometimes there's a little, I'll pat your back, you'll pat my back. And, and sometimes it feels unfair when certain things don't go through, and sometimes it is unfair when things don't go through. It's not necessary. I think it's the fairest process we have figured out. Doesn't mean it's always fair, and it doesn't mean it's always just, but it does work sometimes.
On the whole,
it works, but it does take a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes, and can be discouraging if you're not.
Yeah, and we will redirect sometimes conversations, because an advocate could say something in their talking points that they don't realize how that's being heard by a legislator who has a very specific task. And so we find ourselves having to redirect, because they could actually be discouraging the person if they're saying it in the wrong. So it just
can be complicated. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So in that light, why don't we take the rest of our time here and talk about the 2023 legislative agenda for the ARC of Virginia. And I would love for you to highlight the different things that the ARC is advocating for, and then perhaps extend some calls to action for those of us in this space who would like to help but might not know the best way how to do that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. This year, our big focus, typically the ARC's primary focus, because we have 14,000 people waiting for services in Virginia, is always the waiting list and getting DD waiver slots. Coming at it in a different way this year, because we do recognize that there are a lot of slots already in the budget, which we're happy about. We were pleased to be included in the governor's budget. So right now, and the General Assembly's last year, right now for this budget year, there's 1,100 slots. And that's a lot. Our whole world has changed in for terms of workforce and businesses. And so we have a real issue with provider capacity. There are not enough providers out there with the workforce to serve people. So if you get a slot and you can't use it, it's not
what's the point?
Helpful, right? So the first thing we're letting the legislators know this year is we want those 1,100 slots to remain in the budget. Mm-hmm. And the reason we've created some materials for them 5 talking points on the benefits of getting a waiver slot that you get automatically that aren't services. Because even if you can't find a provider to do the traditional services, in-home support, or whatever the different ones may be, there are several other benefits. The HIP program, consumer-directed services, automatically getting Medicaid, which a lot of people don't already have. So assistive technology.
Yep.
So maybe you don't have a provider, but maybe you need a ramp at your house, then environmental modifications. So we don't want them to hold those slots from people who could get those automatic benefits. And I think we've come to that through conversations with people to realize they need this education. It hasn't been something we focused on in the past, but because we get pushback all the time and we think they're going to maybe not fund slots, we need to bring this education forward so that they do. So we're working on that. And then the DD system transformation plan, we worked on that with the full coalition, but also a huge partner is Virginia Access. That's about building provider capacity. We know that essentially the look of Virginia is we were sued in 2011. And we settled in 2012 because we were told we don't have sufficient community-based services. Here we are a decade later, and in response to the DOJ settlement agreement, Virginia redesigned the waiver in 2016, added these new community services that are fully integrated and would absolutely be in line with the DOJ settlement agreement. But here we are in 2023, and those are virtually still going unused. And there are so many families and stakeholders who worked so hard on waiver redesign to then see a new service like supported living with 165 people in it is ridiculous. And so we have to address that. And the first thing is matching the rate for supported living. So that needs to match so that people's choices are driven by their own life and their own circumstance, not by the rates and the policy of Virginia. So a group home, 5-person group home is what the supported living rate matches now. But that means that a business that provides a 4-person group home, which is the most integrated group home, they have no business incentive to change their model because they would receive less money. And these two services are equal. You can get up to 24 hours of support, round the clock support in a group home, or you can have that in supported living in your own home. And you still get the up to 24 hours. So that needs to be equal. Virginia should not dictate people's choices. Once that is done, then it makes good business sense for providers to do that. Then we want to show them how. I myself, fortunately, have been through 2 large transformations of organizations, but the most recent 7 or 8 years ago at the Arc of Southside, where we closed our group homes. This was what the organization chose to do, close a large sheltered workshop to open all community integrated services. So we have other organizations that are doing that, our Stomping Grounds, Hope House, a lot of different groups that can show the other providers a roadmap. Here's how you transform. Here's the toolkit. So that's where we have a provider business incubator written into our transformation plan. That incubator is going to give them the tools of how to do it and then the money. Medicaid is a fee for service. You got to do the work and then bill and get reimbursed for that. So you've already had the expense. Businesses can't do that. Providers can't do that. So this comes with $2.85 million so that people can apply, get 3 months of funding so they're up running business so that they can stabilize. And so we're excited for that because that could be for new providers or to start up, or it could be expanding current providers, expanding to these new integrated services. And then the next thing we want to do is make sure they have staff to serve people. So that workforce development, I mean, that's an issue in every industry. Everywhere, period. The desire is to do a workforce campaign, like an awareness campaign. And really that's because we find that direct support professionals is a job that comes with high satisfaction. Like personal satisfaction. That's reported regularly. But the general public doesn't know that's a job that exists. They don't know.
They don't know it's a job that exists. And then when they find out that it's a job that exists, oftentimes the pay is not sufficient for them to have a meaningful life themselves. So there are so many issues there.
Yeah, and we're still, so last year we got what, 300 million in rate increases. So that's helping, but it's not enough.
Right.
But it was the first step for sure.
Sure.
So that
Sure.
now there are providers who might be paying $15 an hour. So if I'm at home and thinking, am I going to work at McDonald's for 15
Right.
or help change someone's life for 15?
That's
I'm
right.
doing this all day, every day.
Exactly. Mhm.
But people don't know it exists. So
Exactly.
we have to keep working on the rates, but then we also have to bring some untapped labor pools that into the field that we have, whether that's working with high school and middle schools to let them
Right.
know about this work, a lot of different ways to try to drive people to this profession and
Right.
treat it like a profession that
Right.
it is, because it is. The last part of that particular part is educating families. So once the providers know how to do it, we need families to ask for these services. They need to know, and a lot of times a support coordinator, a case manager, they all have a lot on their plate and they're just referring people to the same services that have always been there. But
Right.
people know about those services. People know about day programs. People know that group homes are available to them. That's why we have thousands of people in them. But people don't know that they can receive that same level of support in these new integrated services since the DOJ came in. So we want to educate people with disabilities themselves and their families to ask for those services
That's right.
and to know how to use them to build their life, regardless of what level of support need. Because there's an absolute range of how much support a person needs. It just has to be built around the person
Right.
to figure that out.
Right.
The last part of that is thinking long term. So once we've got the slots and we get everyone out of crisis, the current governor has committed to ending priority one wait by the end of his term, and we
Oh,
endorse that.
yes.
So that would be within this budget and then the next 2-year budget.
Right.
And if we can accomplish that, we have said forever, if you just get people out of crisis,
Right.
then you can take a long-term view on sustainability.
That's
What
right.
about the people in priority 2 and 3?
Mhm.
And that's the idea of working on developing core services, a small set of services that we can intervene in someone's life earlier, that if they just had a little bit of support, that's going to delay them going into crisis or possibly delay them needing the broader, more expensive services.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's really about a holistic plan. And we have about 5 or 6 budget amendments related to that plan.
Right.
And so when you go to our website and you see this, you see the actual numbers written out, because that's what's important for the legislators to know. What's the
Right.
number I need to vote for?
Right. Right.
Uh, Another area is on our agenda this year is peer mentoring. That is a service that is provided by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. We all have mentors in our life, I think professionally or other ways, and we learn better from people who have experienced life in the same way we have.
Absolutely.
So this is an excellent service, and it was left out of the rate increases last year. And I don't think it was intentional. I really think it was an error because no one was using the service yet. It hadn't been set up, even though it was available. A system hadn't been stood up. And now that it has been, this is happening across the state. And
Right.
so we want them to get that same rate increase to make sure that they're able to hire and pay those peer mentors a fair wage as
Right.
everyone be receiving.
Right. I had a conversation the other day with someone who has an adult son with disabilities, but he is a peer mentor. He will help train people on the transportation system and how to apply for jobs and all of that. And
Yeah.
she said that for her son, it is such he's in his mid 30s. It is
Mhm.
such a meaningful part of his life to be able to help those who are coming up after him to get integrated into community services, and how important for those people that are coming into their adult lives and
Mhm.
needing that support to have somebody who has that same experience to help them get integrated.
It feels like the system and all of us are behind, but finally, thankfully, in a place where we're showing value, showing that we value what people with disabilities have to say and
Right.
what they have to offer. It's just tremendous to be able to see yourself in that person. Imagine being a young person coming out of high school and you want to know that you can do it. And the way to see that is when you see yourself in the other person that's helping you up.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's an exciting service. We're really happy that it's happening.
That's
Um,
awesome.
the next item on the agenda is combining, this is about flexibility for people, families, and individuals. There are spending caps on assistive technology and electronic home-based services. Each year, you can only spend $5,000 on either of those. It's
Mm,
not at all flexible. It's not a time where we were going to ask for the cap to be increased, although it does need to be increased. But as a starting point, the idea, and this came from Virginia Board in an assessment they did, it was a recommendation to combine the caps. So then I have $10,000 that I can spend in either of those services, whichever one matters in my life.
right.
And so it's just more buying power.
Right. Absolutely.
Doesn't hurt the state, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I already have a right to the 5,000 in either one. So
Right.
give the flexibility.
That's right. Again, don't dictate people's choices. Allow, it doesn't cost you any more money. Allow them to make those choices for themselves wherever they need to put that funding.
To put the resource. Yeah, yeah. So we're hopeful on that one. And then this one's a big one. People want to work, people need to work, and they need to be incentivized to work, or not even incentivized, just don't disincentivize, don't punish
That's right.
people for working.
That's
So
right.
right now, if you have a DD waiver, you count on that for your services, whether that's personal care because you need physical assistance throughout your day, whatever it might be. But if you're on that DD waiver, if you earn a certain amount of money, if you receive a certain amount of money, and that could be unearned income, so your SSI, SSDI,
Right.
and your earned income, when you reach a certain max, then you lose your services, you lose your DD waiver. So if we can create eligibility in the Medicaid Works program, the Medicaid Works is the Ticket to Work program. That's a federal term, but in Virginia, we call it Medicaid Works. And it's an excellent program because people can earn much higher wages, earn more money, and not risk losing their services. So we want to make sure that people on the DD waiver can be part of the Medicaid Works program. I'm feeling really good about this going through, knock on wood. We want to make sure that people have the support they need and can be out there working. It's good for them, but it's good for Virginia. It's good
For
for
Virginia.
everybody.
Absolutely. Because just because somebody might have the skill set to make a livable wage according to the standards of, people outside the disability community does not mean that that's enough money to pay privately for those services that the Medicaid waiver provides.
That's right.
So don't keep people with disabilities in poverty by causing them to be afraid of making too much money and risk losing the services that they can't afford. Even if they do make enough money, they can't
Right.
afford those services privately.
No, and we've kept people in poverty forever. So many policies have kept people in poverty. And the next one is expanding virtual access to local public meetings. This one's one of those where there's been a lot of politicking that we've had to try to negotiate. The goal was to make sure that people with disabilities, but also families of people with disabilities who might be caretakers for their family member, that they can be part of the public discourse that all citizens should be able to be part of by joining advisory boards or being appointed to certain commissions, whatever it might be. That once you're appointed there, that you're able to access those meetings virtually. We learned through so much through COVID, right? About access and how much the virtual world opens access up for people. And right now, we want to make sure that people can take part in that and be counted in the quorum if they are an appointed member of that body, that they be in the quorum and that their vote can count, but that they can do that virtually so that if that's their need as a person with a disability or if it's a family member's need. There's been a lot of negotiation from the original bill that would have been much more broad, that would have included state groups like state commissions and state boards. It's now, right now, on a local and regional level only. It's failed in one body already. So now we've gone to, it could be 50% of the meetings. So we're really still working on this. This one's a little in the air to see what we can possibly have come out on the other end that is positive for people.
That's right. And I can speak from personal experience that not only the advocacy work that I've been able to engage in, but just, in a professional space, how limited my ability is to engage in so much of what goes on in the world because I am a full-time caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And COVID has been awful for all of us, but to me, that is a silver lining. It has, because some of these temporary policies have been put into place, or just, I guess, accessibility for various organizations has been put into place virtually, I've been able to participate in a much more meaningful way in a lot of these things. And I don't want to see that go away, because my need to be my daughter's full-time caregiver is not going to go away.
No, and it shouldn't take away your voice as a citizen.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
And the last thing is, this came from really a lot of conversations with our self-advocacy group. There's a statewide A Life Like Yours Self-Advocacy Alliance. A lot of those folks talked about this and talked with the patrons, as well as other organizations that worked on it. And this is just a matter of respect. This is about changing language in code, so in law that currently says handicap, to replace that with disability and people with disabilities and disabled, because we want our language to affirm how we value people.
Right. When I hear, people discussing this issue about people first language, or just using the language that people find the most respectful, that to me is the bottom line. Because some people prefer, person with a disability. Some people like being called disabled person. But there are some terms that just universally people don't want to be referred to as XYZ. And so just that public campaign of awareness is so important, and making sure that we are respectful to people of, all people, but especially people in marginalized communities. We need to not pigeonhole them. We need to not force upon them language that can be in a lot of ways very hurtful and demoralizing and othering, right?
Yeah, and you're right. There are everyone has personal choices, but it's clear those places what you don't want to say. But yeah, person first, identity first. Those are both respectful, and it's about respecting that person's preferences. So absolutely. Yeah, so that's the agenda. It's a big agenda, but
it is every year, and some things get passed and some things don't. But every year, the ARC and advocates who are supported by the ARC and who support the ARC engage in this work every single year. And there's never a guarantee, as we talked about before, in getting individual pieces of legislation passed, or even the entire legislative agenda. There's never a guarantee. But every year we come back with new energy and new enthusiasm, and we engage in this work again, and we just do our best to make sure people with developmental disabilities have the access to the resources and the supports that they need in order to live a life like yours, right? And that is the whole point.
It is. Yeah. We invite everybody to be involved. And we are so fortunate. We work with so many organizations that help mobilize. It's the ARCS network, but it's all of the different groups on the DD Coalition. And there are so many that are connected with families and individuals, and everybody coming together with one voice and moving things forward.
That's right. Well, Tonya, I've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I'm so grateful that you've taken the time out of your very busy schedule to come on Warrior Stories and to share with us not only the 2023 legislative agenda for the ARC of Virginia, but then also just to engage in some education about what advocacy looks like and how we can all be a part of it, even if it isn't directly in policy change, just how important it is that we engage in this work wherever we're at. A simple email can make an enormous difference, and it takes half an hour of your time to sit down and think about what you want to say and to send that email. And sometimes people think, well, who am I? What difference can I make? But the truth is that all of us can make an enormous difference. And that volume of voices is what's so important. And I'm so grateful for the support that the ARC of Virginia offers. Anybody in Virginia who needs that support and needs that help can reach out to the ARC and get the support they need. So thank you.
Thank you. And we encourage people to do that. And if you're not signed up for the action alerts, because those are those specific times to stand for, to advocate for each thing, just go to our website, thearcofva.org/alerts, or just find the spot to sign up, and you'll get the action alerts, and your voice will join with thousands of others.
That's right. That's right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Tonya, and we'll keep in touch. And I look forward to continuing to be involved and to support the ARC and all the awesome work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye bye.